Hello, I'm Nolan Stoltz, and I hope you enjoy my presentation titled The Origin of Progressive Metal Lyrics and Black Sabbath's Music. This is a part of the 5th International Conference on Progressive Rock, this time held at the University of Oxford. The aim of this paper is to trace the origin of progressive metal lyrics back to Black Sabbath. To do this, I consulted scholarship that discusses the typical topics found in heavy metal lyrics and scholarship that discusses progressive rock lyrics. I also looked at band-specific scholarship, ones that are typical of progressive rock. And for genre classification, specifically heavy metal and progressive rock, I looked at the scholarship listed here. My methodology is primarily based on topic theory, dating back to Ratner as it was applied to classical era music, but modeled after Tagg and Eckert for popular music in general, and after Holm-Hudson for progressive rock. Using this methodology, one would say that Black Sabbath's home style is heavy metal, and any of their lyrics that seem more typical of progressive rock would function as a genre synecdoche to signify that style. This terminology dates back to Tagg 1992 as style indicators. Alan Moore 2012 calls them style markers, and then Tagg revises further to say style flags, or a style indicator represents the home style, and then a genre synecdoche refers from within a home style to a foreign style and to the genre associated with that style. For a more comprehensive approach, I also consider the 4 categories in Moore 2016, which are repertory, individual items of music such as songs, style, genre, which includes non-musical aspects, and practice, or process and self-identification. Applying these categories to Black Sabbath, I would say their genre is heavy metal, but certain songs in their repertoire exhibit stylistic qualities of progressive rock. Just because Sabbath is a heavy metal band does not necessarily mean that every song in their repertoire is a heavy metal song, and this would be true for pretty much any band in any genre. For example, Planet Caravan is not a heavy metal song, but Children of the Grave is. In this methodology, I am careful to not overemphasize the importance of lyrical topics for genre classification, and I heed this warning from Hillier 2020. Quote, classifying bands based on lyrical themes alone has the potential to obscure more connections than it reveals. End quote. For example, war-themed lyrics, especially when depicted graphically, could be a heavy metal style flag, either as a style indicator for a home style of heavy metal or a genre synecdoche representing heavy metal as a foreign style. For this to occur, the musical accompaniment ought to be in a heavy metal style as well. This is because war-themed lyrics are common in many other styles of music. For example, folk rock, especially during the Vietnam War era. The topic of war is also found in progressive rock, and this is discussed in the article Nasty Side of Progressive Rock. The distinction may be graphic depictions of war found more so in heavy metal. In my presentation at Progect 2021, I discussed the emergence of heavy metal in Black Sabbath's first 3 albums. I shared that the term heavy metal was not used in print to describe their music until 1972, and that it was not a common term as a genre label until 1974. The same may be said for progressive rock. The term progressive was in use to describe music that existed before the bands we consider to be hallmarks of progressive rock, and yet progressive rock was not yet in use as a genre label. Anderton and Atten 2020 show how that it was not used as a genre label in the British press from 1968 to 74, and I found that to be the case in the US press during those years as well. If heavy metal and progressive rock existed as genres before those labels were used, then we can certainly consider the fusion of heavy metal and progressive rock before the term progressive metal was in use. McCandless's 2010 dissertation on Dream Theater gives Queensryche's 1988 album Operation Mindcrime as the first progressive metal album. My goal today is to show Black Sabbath's role in the emergence of the progressive metal hybrid genre, at least concerning lyrical content. If the progressive metal hybrid genre was established in 1988, regardless if it was described as such at the time, then recordings from 1988 and later could include certain musical or lyrical qualities that operate as style flags. For Black Sabbath, or any other band with heavy metal as its home style for that matter, there may exist genre synecdoches that could signify progressive rock or progressive metal, or another subgenre of progressive rock happening at that time, neo-prog. Based on the scholarship listed earlier, some of the heavy metal style indicators include horror, Satanism or demonology, the occult, the supernatural, suffering, death, or war. Some of the progressive rock style flags include fantasy, and the subject of fantasy-based lyrics is probably covered the most in the scholarship. Tolkien is mentioned several times specifically, and Hegarty and Hollowell say that Lord of the Rings is a touchstone for prog bands. Science fiction is a type of fantasy that's mentioned quite a bit, anything from space-themed lyrics to other types of science fiction. There is mythology, which is discussed quite a bit as well. Things that are magical. Literary works in general. Religious topics are also discussed in the progressive rock discourse, especially non-Western religions. And I would relate the incorporation of non-Western religion into lyrics to an exoticism or Orientalism topic. And finally, and certainly this is not an exhaustive list, just one that most closely relates to Sabbath lyrics, technology. In addition to the subject matter commonly found in progressive rock lyrics, the scholarly literature describes a prog lyric writing style. For instance, Perrin 2005 says, quote, "The presentation of the main literary themes of progressive rock is done in a language and in a style that frequently departs from the conventions of pop music." And on the screen, you'll find the quote in its original French. Like the heavy metal style indicators, these style flags for prog lyric style come from the various sources, sometimes multiple sources with the same or similar descriptions. We have lyrics that are obscure or bizarre, lyrics that are modernist or surrealist, lyrics with layered meanings. Moore 2001b says prog lyrics may have a, quote, quasi-mystical character. Lyrics that have depth, or as Perrin 2005 puts it, have literary value. Or lyrics presented in a narrative structure or in the form of a concept album. When considering progressive metal lyrics, it is important to examine what prog lyrics and metal lyrics have in common. It is true that they have several common traits, especially in the 1980s and later. It is also important to examine what they are both not. For one, pop music. Pop music often has love-based lyrics, but metal and prog usually avoid the subject matter and explore other lyrical themes and create lyrics with deeper meanings. When metal and prog does have love-based lyrics, they are often shrouded in complexities, irony, or find some way to avoid being trite. Hard rock lyrics do engage with love themes, but this is a part of a heavy metal, hard rock dichotomy discussion that is beyond the scope of the paper. There is some scholarship that considers certain hard rock bands to be heavy metal, for example, Van Halen, but that repertoire is not a part of this study. Fantasy and mythology are lyrical topics that progressive rock and heavy metal in the 80s share. For example, here is Dio on stage in 1985 slaying a dragon. Mythology, such as dragons, were very much a part of Dio's lyrics, imagery, and stage show. Referring to lyrical content, Hegarty and Hollowell say, quote, "Arguably, mythology and concepts became the property of heavy rock bands of the 1980s with Iron Maiden, Dio, and Queensryche, which fed into a later form of prog rock that includes the genre of progressive metal." Placing these three bands on a timeline, we have Iron Maiden with their mythology-based Flight of the Icarus song from their 1983 album Peace of Mind, and below that, there's the first Dio album, also 1983. For Queensryche, I've included the 1988 album that McCandless had as the first progressive metal album. The question is, how did we get from Black Sabbath to Dio and Iron Maiden to Queensryche if we were to trace progressive metal lyrics? The connection is quite simple. Ronnie James Dio joined Black Sabbath in 1979, becoming their new lead singer and primary lyricist. They recorded 2 albums, the first of which in 1980, and then he left in 1983 to form his own band. I've also considered Ronnie James Dio's work before Black Sabbath, and a case can be made for his work in Rainbow as an additional origin of progressive metal lyrics. However, because Rainbow's music is closer to hard rock and progressive rock than they are to heavy metal, it would be beyond the scope of this paper. If we look at Sabbath's 1980 album, we will see the emergence of this lyrical style. For example, the dragons and kings of neon nights, and Lady Evil, whom is magical and mystical. We can trace this topic much further back in Sabbath's music, in fact another 10 years prior. The Wizard from Sabbath's debut album was inspired by Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Although that would not be understood from the lyrics, the source of inspiration was revealed by Geezer Butler, the band's bassist and primary lyricist, many years later. Returning to our list, we see quasi-mystical character. I would describe some of the lyrics in Children of the Sea, Lady Evil, and The Sign of the Southern Cross as quasi-mystical. One could also say about some of Geezer Butler's lyrics from several years earlier. Lyrics in Symptom of the Universe have that quasi-mystical quality, such as the Mother Moon and the Unicorn, and the fantasy lyrics in Supernaut, the magic, the heroes who's lived 1,000 years and wants to touch the sun and climb every mountain on the moon. Ronnie James Dio returned to Black Sabbath and recorded an album released in 1992. Regarding the lyrical content, he said, quote, "We set out to stay modern, to live in this world. I removed the vestiges of wizards and dragons that I've always done in Dio," end quote. Not sure that was his decision, as he was told by the band, "No rainbows, no dragons this time around." But the prog signifying lyrical content we do get on that album is science fiction and technology, particularly on the song Computer God, and I've enlarged the album cover so you can see the technology in science fiction. Lyrics with science fiction and space themes may be found in Sabbath's music as far back as 1970 and 71 with the songs Planet Caravan, Iron Man, and Into the Void. The band intended Iron Man to be a science fiction song, which may explain the use of a ring modulator on the voice at the beginning of the song. So it's not only the lyrics that evoke science fiction, but oral references such as the ring modulator effect. It is probably a reference to the Daleks from the British sci-fi television show Doctor Who.
Obey the Daleks! You are in our power!
Returning to our list once again, literary works as a source of inspiration for lyrics. In addition to The Wizard being inspired by Tolkien, the song Behind the Wall of Sleep likely came from H.P. Lovecraft's short story Beyond the Wall of Sleep. Geezer Butler, the lyricist, said that the title for their 1975 song Thrill of It All came from a book with the same title. I have been unable to find a book with that title, so perhaps it was a chapter title or another short story in a collection. There is a curious line of lyric in the song Sabbath Bloody Sabbath that ends with "Bog blast all of you." After researching the term bog blast, I highly suspect that it originates from the line "Bog blast them" in Anthony Burgess's 1962 novel A Clockwork Orange. Using Russian words, Burgess created fictional slang for the novel, and this is one case. Bog is Russian for God, and the context of bog blast them seems to imply God damn them. The context of Geezer Butler's "Bog blast all of you" certainly seems to imply "God damn all of you." A Clockwork Orange as source material seems all the more likely, considering that the movie version came out only 2 years before Geezer wrote the lyrics for the song. Beyond subject matter for prog lyrics, one can also examine the style in which prog lyrics are written and the form in which they are presented. Obscure or bizarre lyrics could function as a style flag for progressive rock. Thus, within the home style of heavy metal, when there is an instance of a particularly obscure or bizarre lyric, it would function as a genre synecdoche to signify progressive rock. The lyrics that precede "Bog blast all of you" are "God knows as your dog knows," with nose spelled N-O-S-E. It's a bizarre line of lyric created by wordplay that is more about the sonic quality and less about any deep meaning. Compare this, for example, to the butterflies and the flutterbys in Genesis's Supper's Ready. Also, mum to mud to mad to dad, or dad to damn to dumb to mum. This is also wordplay that sounds bizarre, and I believe, in the case of Black Sabbath, it signifies progressive rock. Regarding lyrics that have depth, or as Perrin put it, have literary value, and of course that is highly subjective, I think if one were to look at the lyrics in Black Sabbath in the 1970s, we would find the most sophisticated lyrics, the ones with the most depth, layered meanings, metaphors, and interesting language. The 3 songs that stand out the most for me would be A National Acrobat, Spiral Architect, and Symptom of the Universe. And finally, and again, this is not an exhaustive list of potential progressive rock style flags, lyrics that are presented in a narrative structure or in the form of a concept album. And it's interesting to note that in October 1975, Ozzy said that their next album would be a concept album. And then a few months later, he said that they were thinking about doing a rock opera based on Iron Man for their next album. They didn't end up doing that, but it's interesting to note that they were thinking along those lines in the mid-70s. A quote from Geezer Butler summarizes his lyrical interests, which include several of the progressive rock style flags that I've shared: fantasy, science fiction, the magical or supernatural, literary works as source material or inspiration. He also mentions the avoidance of love songs. He said, quote, "I think science fiction played a big part, things like Iron Man. Science fiction, fantasy, the supernatural, and a lot of politics as well. The one thing we didn't want to do was normal love songs, because everybody in the world was doing them. If I'd read a particularly good book, I'd condense that down to a song." End quote. Thus far, we have traced the connection of lyrical topics found in Black Sabbath's output in the 1970s to those found in their work with Ronnie James Dio in the early 80s, and to Dio's solo work immediately following, which was contemporary with Iron Maiden. This led to progressive metal being codified as a hybrid genre by 1988 with Queensryche's Operation Mindcrime. We also looked at Dio's return to Black Sabbath in 1992. But what about Sabbath's music in the interim? Sabbath released 5 studio albums during that time, the first of which was 1983's Born Again, featuring Deep Purple vocalist Ian Gillan. Gillan penned the lyrics, and none of them signify progressive rock. In fact, many of them signify hard rock as the foreign style. Although there are musical qualities on this album that contributed to the development of the progressive metal hybrid genre, the lyrics did not. Of the next 4 albums, there are 2 examples that I would like to share. Mythology and religious topics, especially non-Western, are 2 of our potential progressive rock style flags. In the case of the song Seventh Star, the lyrics were inspired by ancient mythology, theology, biblical prophecies, and Egyptology. Jeff Nichols, the band's keyboardist and primary lyricist at the time, said that the lyrics came from, quote, "an idea from ancient times about the coming of Armageddon when 7 stars lined up," end quote. This functions as an exoticism or Orientalism topic. Another type of mythology Sabbath temporarily engaged with was Norse mythology, and this may be found on their 1990 album Tyr. It includes 3 songs on the subject of Norse mythology: The Battle of Tyr, Odin's Court, and Valhalla. They were not the first metal band to engage with Norse mythology. In 1983, Manowar had a song titled Gates of Valhalla, and in the same year as Sabbath's Tyr album, Bathory also had a song titled Valhalla. Applying the concept of homestyle and genre synecdoche to Bathory, and if we could consider their homestyle to be Viking metal, a song titled Valhalla certainly would not signify another genre such as progressive rock or progressive metal. However, for Black Sabbath, whose home style is heavy metal, the use of mythology-inspired lyrics signifies progressive rock, and especially in this case because the music that supports it also, at times, signifies progressive rock. The 3 songs, The Battle of Tyr, Odin's Court, and Valhalla, were originally conceived as a single song, clocking in at 8.5 minutes. In the context of heavy metal, the length of the song signifies prog, as do the use of synthesizers to evoke the sound of a symphony orchestra. Other musical style flags, such as the chromaticism in the keyboard parts, work together with the mythology-based lyrics to signify progressive rock. I only know about the original conception of these 3 songs as being one by studying a studio sheet that I had come across. The separate titles are not there, only Valhalla, and I can tell from the various descriptions of the music such as intro, timpani, and the multiple layers of keyboards that these are referring to the 2 songs that precede Valhalla on the album. My conclusions are that we can trace the origins of progressive metal lyrics through Dio and Iron Maiden, but back to the first Black Sabbath album. We should have some time left over for questions, so feel free to ask them now. Or if you prefer, to email me at stoltz@uscupstate.edu. Any questions, comments, suggestions, happy to hear from you. And if you're watching this video after the conference is over, feel free to email me. Love to hear from you. Questions, comments, whatever. Thank you for watching.